Joseph, please take it away.
So, good evening, or actually good morning to you. First of all, I would like to thank you for this invitation opportunity, and thank you very much, Bill, for your kind words. I hope I will keep to your ambitions. And thank you for all the comrades being present today, and hopefully we can have an engaging and constructive discussion. And hopefully also I learn from you in the US. It's always interesting to know what's happening, because especially regarding or the student movement or various kind of movement occurring in the States, it's always interesting to see, especially regarding labor movement. And especially, I think we'll come back to this later on, but if we can speak about a challenge regarding in the Jewish youth about Zionism, which is not really present at the same level in Europe, I think this is quite the challenge as a hegemonic ideology among Jewish population in the US, Zionism. This is really interesting, especially considering the political dynamics in Europe. So I'll try to cover what Bill was asked me to do, and again afterwards hopefully we can have a constructive discussion altogether. So first of all, to come back on the situation, Bill mentioned it in introduction. So we cannot deny that we're living and have been living for more than a year now a catastrophe. And as we say in Arabic, a Nakba, a catastrophe, in the way that the Nakba is not only a punctual movement in the history of the Palestinian, but is unfortunately a continuous process of destruction and elimination that is connected to the nature of the state of Israel as a settler colonial state, seeking not to exploit the indigenous population like we've seen in South Africa or maybe Algeria, but the comparison should be made much more with Australia, North America, as seeking the elimination of the local population, indigenous population. And this is quite important, as we will see in our analysis, how we analyze international solidarity in this perspective also, regarding regional revolutionary processes and international solidarity. The Nakba, as I was telling you, is a continuous process, but since a year we've witnessed the most violent form of the Nakba process. And Bill was mentioning, the numbers basically put forward by the health ministry of in the Gaza Strip, but as you may well know, most probably there's other statistics speaking of much higher numbers. For example, we take the medical magazine Lancet mentioned nearly 200,000 people dead, directly or indirectly, in June. If we maintain the same statistics, we would be exceeding now 300,000 in a population of a bit more than 2 million. So this would mean 10% of the population eliminated. So this is regarding the Gaza Strip, and I think you can see that the lies, and I'll come back to this regarding Israel or the US, but we can see this is not about particular personalities or a political party. The assassination of Sinwar, the head of Hamas political bureau, is not meaning at all that we will have, as some analysts, mostly right-wing, have said, an opportunity for a ceasefire. This has been a complete lie. This is not a war against Hamas. This is a war against the Palestinians. And this we should be very clear. Just I will come back later on. In Lebanon, it's not a war against Hezbollah, but against the Lebanese population. So, and the Jabaliya camp, what we're witnessing is a continuous, genocidal war. And as Bill again mentioned, ICG mentioned the genocidal war, and for this, it's, I don't know for the US, but I think it's the same. But if you check the main kind of hegemonic bourgeois newspapers on the day of the 7th of October, it's like nothing happened. Like basically remembering, the assassinations, the elimination, the killing of Israeli civilians and soldiers on the 7th of October, but nothing regarding a year of genocide. Was 10 days ago in a debate with a German MP from the SPD, so the Social Democrat Party, and to tell you this is, well, Germany is the worst country in Europe, and when it comes to the Israel, to the Palestinian issue. It's still about Israel defending itself, but this is a discourse that you find throughout, I would say, the ruling classes in Europe and in the US. Now, for Gaza, this is the situation. Now we haven't talked about it a lot in the medias, but it's important also to look at what's happening in the West Bank since the 7th of October. There have been more than 700 people that have been assassinated, both by the Israeli occupation army and the settlers. At the same time, we have seen the highest level of basically land being grabbed by the Israeli occupation army, more than 2,000 hectares. And in a continuous process, and this is the difference in dynamic regarding the West Bank. The West Bank is really about grabbing the land and expanding the settlements. Maybe you must be aware, but in the Oslo, so-called Oslo agreement, there were around, at this period, in beginning of the 90s, 200,000 settlers. Now we have more than 700,000 settlers between East Jerusalem and the West Bank more generally. So there's a clear willingness to continue, grabbing land, eliminating the Palestinians, pushing them out. And even the whole story about the two-state solution doesn't make sense. Even the Israeli parliament have voted a few months before, just confirming the behavior for the past 30 years that they don't want any kind of two-state solution. So, and also a few weeks ago, you had the deadliest attack by Israeli jets in Turkarem, killing more than 20 people in a civilian building, just bombing it. So you can see that the violence is not limited. Obviously, the worst is in Gaza Strip, but also in the West Bank. And obviously, you have the repression, deep repression, continuing in 48 Palestine, what is called today Israel, against Palestinians 48, but also against Israeli anti-Zionists trying to demonstrate against the war, against more generally Israeli policies. And finally, after a year, we've seen that this Nakba, this catastrophe, has not been limited, unfortunately, to only the Palestinians, but have expanded since mid-September to Lebanon. And this started with, I think we can use the term kind of terror attacks by pagers, basically killing more than 40 people, but injuring more than 3,000, at least a few thousand people in Lebanon. And not only, as it was very much promoted, Hezbollah soldiers, but also people that were working, so civilian working in institutions connected to Hezbollah. Since then, there has been an escalation of violence turning into an open war. So you had the massive bombing of Lebanon. Obviously, some areas have more bombing, especially Shia inhabited areas such as Dahye, the south, the Bekaa. But other areas of Lebanon have been targeted as well. And ground offensive that has been, for the most part, unsuccessful on the side of the Israeli occupation army because of the resistance of Hezbollah, the Lebanese political party. And you've seen also when it comes to Lebanon, I was saying, to just give you a couple of examples, how it's not limited to the war against Hezbollah. For example, there was, and they're sending a message also, Israeli, politicians, Netanyahu, Israeli occupation army. There's a big, propaganda, social media is trying to create civil war among the Lebanese. There's a high, tensions among the Lebanese, a lot of opposition to Hezbollah for various reasons, because they considered to have involved Hezbollah into a war. But we can come back to this into the discussion. There's more deeper frustrations against Hezbollah regarding its political orientation, strategy, but really the Israelis try to create, a kind of civil war through speech, but also through bombing particular areas. For example, a few days ago, I think a week ago, a Christian region that was in the north of Lebanon called Zorta welcomed, family of about 20 people in a building. This building was bombed by the Israelis, 20 civilians, just to send a message. Basically, if you welcome IDPs coming from the south, the Bekaa, mostly Shias, we will bomb you, basically. And this kind of example have been repeated on a couple of occasions. So, and now we're still awaiting what will happen regarding an Israeli attack in Iran. And this is without forgetting, attack of Israel in Syria, in Yemen. And this is happening, obviously, in total impunity because it is allowed to do this and supported, not only as silent complicity, but is totally supported mostly by the US, but also by Western ruling class more generally, by Western imperialism. And now this comes to, after presenting this brief situation, so what is our role now? There's a lot of debates, and I think this is in Europe and US, what to do, especially after the summer, after the student occupation movements. And there's also a feeling, and maybe we can discuss this a bit later on, but this is what my exchanges in different countries in Europe, but involve also in Switzerland, in the university, among students, feeling of frustrations, despair, because after a year, despite our organization, occupation, protest movement, there's a feeling nothing is going forward, actually. On the opposite, genocide is still ongoing. And there might be a willingness, to stop trying to build a large popular movement from below, to working around BDS, boycott, disinvestment, sanction, and rather sticking to particular kind of actions or slogans around the resistance, etc. And I can understand to some extent, there's appealing, and to say why try, to expand our movement, try to convince. Sorry, just 1 second. I will stop my WhatsApp, otherwise it's going to be really awful. Yeah, done. Sorry for this. There's a feeling, why still work to extend the movement among trade unions, feminist movement, ecological movement after a year. And this is, I think, a debate we have to have, a debate that still is ongoing, that there's no alternative basically to building a large popular movement, trying to basically convince, different forms of association, within, the kind of also workers working among, trade unions, workers, feminist movement, ecological movement, ecologist, anti-racist movement, continue trying to build basically a counter-hegemonic project. Because, and I will come back to this in conclusion, I think Palestine has become a political compass and clarification regarding, leftist politics very clearly. And how we can build basically a counter-economic project to today, what I believe, unfortunately, since 2008, the financial crisis, are dominating our politics, not only in the West, but internationally speaking. So neoliberal, what I call the neoliberal authoritarian project, and the fascist movement. I won't go into detail about the definition, if you can call them fascist, fascistic, but I think we can agree that there is a clear rise of far-right, fascistic, and fascist movements sometimes, that they're unfortunately dominating the project. And I think our duty as a left is to continue building the BDS, the academic boycott, as Bill has mentioned, and I think this is very important to continue this kind of work and basically make any kind of relationship and any kind of collaboration with Israel unacceptable. It should be unacceptable to basically work with a state that has been defined not by, like us, radical leftists, but as an apartheid state. Racist colonial state has been described as such by, international humanitarian organization or human rights organizations such as Amnesty, but Israeli organization as B'Tselem, and make that it is unacceptable to collaborate with such a state, just as it was unacceptable to collaborate with South Africa apartheid. And how do we do this? This is only by pressuring our ruling classes. And this is the key, and this is only through hard, long long time work to build a, you know, a popular movement from below, being able to be involved in workers, trade union, association, feminist group, anti-racist groups, to understand that we have a destiny in common. Why? Because I believe that any kind of victory for Palestine is a victory for us. And as well, to push forward for the liberation of Palestine, or at least advance the rights of Palestinians, it goes through pressuring our own ruling class, because our own ruling class have interest with Israel. Actually, historically speaking, the Palestinians have never only fought against the Zionist movement prior to the establishment of Israel or the state of Israel. If you look at when the Zionist movement, especially during the British Mandate, when you had the Palestinian revolt, the massive Palestinian revolt between 36 and 39, with a long period of strikes, but also armed revolt, the British army sent 100,000 soldiers, and the Zionists aided as well. After the establishment of Israel, and Israel becoming a key imperial asset, first for the kind of old colonial powers, Britain and France, it became the key asset for the US to consolidate its influence in the region, to the Middle East and North Africa. And if there is any specificity to this region, it's not connected to its ethnicity or religion, but because of the concentration of energy resources, oil and gas, that has become the main energy resources since the Second World War, exceeding the charcoal, etc. And until today, you can see that this is key. Two examples, just to, if you look at when did the US basically organize a so-called, international coalition to act against the Houthis? Well, when they say international coalitions, there's basically the US and Britain, and maybe France sometimes. It's when the Houthis started to attack, boats transporting energy resources. Second example, Biden did not say to Israel, don't attack Iran after the latest attack. Let's please don't attack any kind of energy resource center manufacturing of oil. Why? Because this would have bad influence on the international economy and on the US economy, causing maybe inflation, which would be bad during the current situation regarding the elections and Democrats. So the oil issue, the energy resource issue, is key in its relation with Israel. And this is how you understand the key relation. And so, since 67, the US have been in average sending or providing 4 billions of financial assistance to Israel. And actually, in a year, this assistance has exceeded $18 billion since the 7th of October. So just imagine. And there's a consensus among Republicans, Democrats, to support Israel. There's a complete consensus. The only difference in terms of rhetoric is due basically to the popular base, or a section of the popular base of the Democrats that have to deal some leftists that are still in the Democrat and, Arab population, not white population. This is the only reason why the Democrats have to say sometimes, they have to criticize rhetorically, but I think, as Biden has said, no other US administration has helped so much Israel in the past history. This is why the US has playing a complete hypocritical role since the 7th of October and even before, by saying continuously, that they are putting red lines to Israel, which has been completely untrue. And we have to be clear that they're completely lying on this, and actually still supporting militarily Israel completely. Israel would not have been able to continue its war against the Palestinians and start a new war against Lebanon without the support of the US. So it's not about saying just they're, silently complicit. They're partners in the genocide in Palestine and in the extension of the war in Israel. So this is why also we have to have a regional internationalist perspective when we look at Palestine. They have common interests. And the ruling class understand this. They're helping Israel because it's a key imperial asset to consolidate basically US influence. This is also how we understand the push by the US especially to normalize the relations between Israel and the Gulf regimes. Again, to counter the rising influence of China, but also to consolidate its influence on countries with key production and energy resources. And I think there's a second aspect that we have to take into consideration, is that Israel has become more and more a political model to follow, especially for far-right fascistic political parties. What do I mean by this? Meaning that Israel completely ignore basic, democratic fundamental rights, international law, is an outspoken, completely outspoken racist society. And actually, fascistic movement would love to treat non-white population the way Israel treats the Palestinian, a very security way. So it's basically a model to follow in many ways, And this is something ideologically I think we have to take into consideration. In a world that, and I think it's absolutely needed to say this, that the genocide in Gaza also reflects the deep political crisis we're living in the world. If it's happening, it's obviously about what I said, the key imperial asset Israel represents ideologically for the fascistic, but also we are in a moment since 2008 that it has been very difficult for the left, and when I'm saying the left, it's largely speaking, not only the radical left, to constitute a political alternative for the popular classes. And instead of it, unfortunately, it's been the neoliberal authoritarian project still dominating to some extent, even during crisis, or the fascistic win. And this is why also Gaza reflects the deep political crisis we're living in, the incapacity, the incapacity for us to organize and provide an alternative to the working and popular class. So our role must be very clear that we have to play as leftists, as radicals, as progressives, a role in building, in structuring the movements in favor of Palestine. Because within the movements in Palestine, I think you notice the same in the left, you have people from various, backgrounds, meeting, accumulating political experience, and making the links between capitalism, between issues of feminism, anti-racism, ecology, and it has given also a new push for the left into, protest movement, and again, accumulating experience, which is something very important. Obviously, this kind of talk conferences are important to add knowledge, to exchange on our ideas, but we cannot deny it, that if you want the motor for any kind of radical leftist or more generally for the left, is large popular movement in which we can play a role to give an orientation, that is anti-capitalist, anti-internationalist, and making the links. And actually you had, and again, this is something I would like to discuss with you, but when I see the people that met in the protest movement around Palestine or the occupation were from different backgrounds that would have most probably never met without the Palestinian movement. And it's not easy. We can also, and I think it's the same situation with people having different, political trajectories, backgrounds, but they're accumulating experience together. And this is also a fear, I think, from our ruling class, that to see that people are emerging, accumulating political experience together. And this is why also Palestine is obviously, we have to be in support because it's an internationalist issue, but it's more and more becoming a key issue for our own, countries and democratic framework. Whether in the US or in Europe, you have had a deep attack on democratic rights when it comes to Palestine. So forbidding, demonstrations, forbidding or criminalizing the movement of BDS, criminalizing academics, attacks on academics that speak around Palestine. So it's also about, and this is why whenever there's an issue around Palestine, people organizing around Palestine, you see our ruling classes threatening, attacking them. Two key examples also when it comes to political personalities that we could characterize, I think, in our vocabulary as radical reformists, reformists like Jeremy Corbyn in the UK, has been attacked on the issue of Palestine, specifically on the issue of Palestine. And in France, for example, Mélenchon, that was has evolved quite positively when you say him 10 years ago, has been attacked mostly on the Palestinian issue, mostly since 7th October on the Palestinian issue. And while he's trying to build influence, I don't know if you follow the New Popular Front, whatever, it's also a result, we cannot deny it, of the organization around Palestine. So Palestine is playing a great, issue also regarding the way the left has to reconstruct, has to rebuild. And also what is also important to understand, how we accumulate experience and we share experience together, the ruling classes does the same. Israel actually is has played a key role in providing IT technology that it uses against the Palestinians or the Lebanese to regional regime and international states, US, Europe, selling themselves as, we've used our weapons against the Palestinians, we used our IT against Palestinians, Lebanese, look how fantastic it is. And actually you have regional regimes, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Morocco, have purchased Israeli IT technology to repress their own opposition groups, etc. Same in Europe, same in France or the US. Similarly, they've been sharing the so-called security experience when it comes to the Palestinians. I know in the US you have, for example, collaboration when it comes to police. So they share the experiences. Actually, Israel, in the end of 2023, had the highest level of weapon selling in the past decade, 13 billion. It became a key, asset in Israeli industry with the IT. Just as Israel was the one to sell, weapons to Myanmar, also dictatorship, and repressing it. And in the past, we had different experiences, whether in the region, Israel helping France and Algeria, or Israel helping different South American dictatorship trying to repress their own opposition. So we can see here we have a key interest. So obviously, when I say this, it's not to be egoistic, to say, it's also about helping each other, us. But what I want to put forward is that the issue is not solidarity and charity, is that solidarity, we see that we have interest in common, that our destiny is common. And this is how we understand that the best way to help, I believe, the Palestinians is struggling our own ruling class, that are helping the Palestinians, that are helping, the Israeli colonial and apartheid state. Just as when the Palestinians have victories, they also weaken our own ruling class. And this is how we understand, I think, there's a relationship regarding this. Just as I think it's important also to point out this, I talked about the international political scene, which I believe is dominated, unfortunately, until now by neoliberal authoritarian project and the fascistic project, which both support Israel. We have also the regional dynamics. And also what I was telling you is that there's a feeling of sometimes a bit of despair, and that some people would believe that maybe, change from below is very difficult. So let's try, a particular state or particular movement, and change from above could be possible. And therefore, maybe hearing, a particular propaganda that can be appealing regarding, opposition against Israel. And this is where you have, sometimes, I think people, and I think campism is not only about ideology, it's also about the, obviously there's an heritage about the fact of campism as a, whatever opposes basically the US, you support it. But I think there's also a fact that a lot of people, aspiring from change from below has become more and more difficult. This idea returned very significantly in 2011 during the beginning of the refugee processes in the Middle East, North Africa. But I can see already with the people that in the beginning of 20s, and they didn't know about Tahrir Square and how the Egyptian revolution became a symbol of emancipation throughout the world. You had people, you had the whole occupation movement throughout the world. People, I remember in the US saying, we want to do it like the Egyptians, we want to work like the Egyptians. And the idea of change from below, of participation of millions of people, strikes, being able to overthrow dictators that have been in power for 30 years, came back. But after this, you had the counter-revolutions throughout the region that crushed them. And this is also something to take into consideration when we look at the resistance or the solidarity in the region. So sometimes there's a feeling, looking at the propaganda of a couple of regimes, support them. And it falls in a form of campism. Iran, Turkey. But if we look at the politics of these regime, actually they're protecting their own geopolitical interest and their own regime rather than seeking the liberation of the Palestinians. Iran actually has been increasingly criticized among some Palestinians, but also among some Lebanese, and even among the popular base of Hezbollah, saying, what did Iran do for us? We have been involved in the war since the 7th of October. Okay, they launched a couple of attacks, but I mean, consider the level of destruction in Lebanon today, there's a feeling of frustration because they never had the willingness or the orientation to liberate the Palestine. Since the 7th of October, the key interest of Iran is to improve their geopolitical situation in the region in the perspective of future negotiation with the US, especially regarding the nuclear agreement and sanctions. On this, and we can go back later on this if you want deeper. Turkey is even worse. There's a song of, was it of Dalida, a famous Egyptian singer, Italian singer, that was parole, 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 meaning talking, talking, talking only. Erdogan has been this, plus lying. So Erdogan has said he will send maybe an army against Israel. So, and after months of pressuring after the 7th of October, he officially declared in March or April that they will not allow any kind of trade between Israel and between Turkey and Israel. Well, what happened? Most of the Turkish companies have been sending their products through the so-called Palestinian Authority custom to Israel. This, you have a rise in trade between March and August of over 1,000%. So trade is continuing. And above this, you had in, I don't know if you heard about, it's a form of, also I think we can take of ethnic cleansing, the collaboration between Israel and Turkey in the Haut-Karabakh. It's a region that was combated between Azerbaijan and Armenia. And Azerbaijan, with the assistance of Turkey and Israel, kicked out 100,000 Armenian out of 120,000. Okay, so they've been collaborating continuously. So, and to understand that there's a common interest between also the regional popular classes in Palestine. And whenever the Palestinian issue come back to the fore, you have demonstrations often. And this solidarity is not only about Palestine, it's about also criticizing their own regimes regarding their collaboration with Israel or Western states, or not doing enough, and also about the absence of democracy, social justice, and self-determination of their own future, deciding about their future. And this is why you have repression, both in Jordan and Egypt, or any kind of attempts to demonstrate very harshly. Actually, Jordan, every time there's a demonstration going to the Israeli embassy or towards occupied Palestine, they've been repressed. In Egypt, it's very, very difficult to organize. The repression is terrible. You still have tens of thousands of political prisoners. And to give you an example, when the Palestinian issue came back to the fore, the first time in decades you had marches of return organized in the different countries of the region was in 2011, following the overthrow of Ben Ali, Mubarak, elsewhere. So you had marches from Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and Egypt that were organized. And actually, for the first time, I found myself agreeing with the foreign minister of Israel, I think his name was Leibovitz or something like this, saying that the biggest threat for Israel is a democratic Egypt, and more generally a democratic Middle East, because this is how people will organize for Palestine. Just as in Egypt, you had the first demonstration in decades in 2011 following the overthrow of Mubarak, the first time demonstrated against Israeli embassy in Cairo. So there's a direct common interest. And as I was telling you, the regional regimes are generally connected or to US imperialism or to other forms of imperialism that don't care also about Palestine despite the propaganda, whether being Russia or China. And this is very important for us to say. And I think because as I was telling you, the issue of putting forward change from below, mass participation, organizing our own ruling classes, this is the main demand basically of the Palestinians. And actually in the past year, and I would try to conclude now, we've seen, despite the catastrophe, and again, I don't want to undermine what we're witnessing, what we're living, it's a complete catastrophe. But despite this, we can find, I think, some few positive things. First of all, there's been few victories of the BDS movement, boycott, disinvestment, and sanction, disinvestment from a couple of companies. But more importantly, there's been a radicalization among workers, trade unions. Just lately, I know in the US you had a couple also of victories regarding, or at least advances regarding this case, whether academically or also among different workers movement, labor movement. Just lately you had also the dockers, and you had a couple of examples of dockers refusing to transport weapons for Israel. Lately, a few days ago, it was in Greece. And you have this growing. So this form of radicalization, I think, is really interesting. We have I think, the highest level of conscientization around the Palestinian issue in decades. I mean, throughout in our society, much more people know about the Palestinian issue, the history. So these are, I think, positive things to build on. This said, there's much more to do. And throughout history, we never saw the ruling class, give anything to the workers, to the popular classes, without pressure from below and threatening them, basically. And we have to be clear about it. Whether democratic rights for workers, democratic rights for women, key gains regarding anti-racist issues, had never been given by the ruling class, never. And this will not be different with Palestine, because the issue of Palestine is actually, in a way, and please don't misunderstand me, is bigger than only Palestine. It's about really the future of the region and the world, actually, what we're struggling, and also about rebuilding, I think, a left on this issue. So yeah, to conclude on this, my main message is we need to continue to build, to structure our movement to represent a real threat to our own ruling class, because I really believe that our destiny are shared, is linked basically with the Palestinians. Yeah, I'll stop here. Thank you very much. Anna, I believe we're here among comrades, and so I'm not here to give lessons or say you're doing right or wrong, and I think it's an exchange, huh? And I hope you seeing it is like this. I'm not claiming to be, and I hope you don't see me this way, is that I'll give you the solution or magical thing. And again, I'm here to learn also from you. We live in different political environment. Also, this is something to take into consideration. But yeah, just to make clear, so I'm also here to learn from you. And yeah, so for on the first question regarding workers' movement, labor movement in the Middle East, in North Africa, we cannot deny that we're witnessing very difficult times. If we talk only about Palestine, is about surviving today. If it labor movement in Gaza Strip is very difficult. You had different movement in the West Bank, but as you well know, it's kind of hard to do independent trade union. It's very much controlled by political parties, especially Fatah. But you had cause, for example, regarding the weapons, a ban of any kind of collaboration of weapons, try to forbid any kind of selling of weapons to Israel. And I think we should, follow these kind of things. But we've seen in the past decade some movement among, the teachers in Palestine, quite interesting, regarding austerity measures, because the PA not only collaborating with Israel and playing basically its tool of repression, has been very much neoliberal and implementing austerity measures. So we've seen a couple of movements regarding, teachers, After also because of the specificities of the, I would say, the occupied territories, like the policies of de-development of Israel for the past decades, the center of capital accumulation are very much limited. You know, the stratification of the economy, the impossibility to build large manufacturing, or very difficulty, the problems in agriculture. And actually most of the Palestinian bourgeoisie, if you see the big ones, have accumulated their money in the Gulf, and money. And a lot of people are basically dependent or on remittances or salaries from the PA that is all from outside. So this is one thing regarding Palestine. And when it comes to 48, and this is also one of the, I think, very often in the movement, and this is something I'll try to put forward, is that we see Israel as a colonial kind of state similar as Algeria and South Africa. And as I told you in introduction, it's not the case. And this have implication. This is why we're talking about before the connection between the Palestinian working class and the regional working class, because I believe they're band together, they have common interests, and the Palestinians on their own will not be able to liberate themselves. We have to be clear about this. That Israel's military superiority is amazing, and Israel is not dependent on the Palestinian working class. You do have, a small number that have been working from the occupied territories in Palestinian construction, a bit in agriculture, but otherwise, even the Palestinians from 48, so Palestinians with Israeli citizenship, have been forbidden from key sectors of the Israeli economy. And this has history. It is linked to basically the Israeli trade union, main trade union or confederation, Isdralut. The slogan, Jewish labor, basically Jewish labor, Jewish land, Jewish production, basically. And they have eliminated, and this was a debate among the Zionist movement. And actually, this is also, when we speak about the problem with Netanyahu, we have to come back to the key issue that the problem, obviously, we oppose Netanyahu. It's government that is the most far right. Actually, every election in Israel, they say this. It's the most far-right government in the history of Israel. But the problem is with the nature of the state as a settler colonial state. The state was built actually by the leftist Zionists. They were the Zionist labor movement, the Israel, and the opposition to Netanyahu is not rooted into democracy, but who can manage better the apartheid decolonization system. Yeah. So this is quite important to say, how Palestinian liberation is connected to the regional liberation and the internationalist movement. And this is why we have a role in it, to weaken our ruling class that have been consistently helping the Israeli state as a key imperial asset and more as a ideological, kind of political model. Now, when it comes to the rest of the workers in the Middle East, Jordan has witnessed kinds of, forms of organization, but lots of repression. And there's always also the Jordanian state regime is playing on the, difference between original Jordanian against Palestinians that constitute a vast section of the population. And they've been helped, obviously, by the Israelis and the US in repressing. Egypt, as you know, is very, very repressive. The only trade unions left is basically the ones historically linked to the state, the regime. All the attempts to build independent trade unions after 2011, and it started prior to this, and the Mahalla kind of strikes in 2008, but officially they were recognized after 2011, have been completely repressed. Okay, you have a couple of movements, but particular punctual strikes, but Egypt is very, very much repressed. And for you to remember, and this is how we see also the connection between, the ruling classes, the regional ruling classes, and Israel Western imperialism. Egypt is the second recipient of US assistance since '81, since the peace agreement between Israel and Egypt. So it's a key asset also for, US imperialism in the region, helping the army to consolidate its relation with Israel and Western imperialism. And actually, Egypt has, it would not have been possible, sorry, to impose a siege on Gaza without the collaboration of Egypt. As simple as this. And Egypt has played, therefore, a very catastrophic role for decades when it comes to the Palestinian issue. You had some movement in Morocco a bit more. You have a bit more space for the organization of trade unions, and actually, well, you have to do translation, but there's a good website in Arabic called Al Munadil, which is a leftist group connected to the Fourth International that do a lot of good work when it comes to trade unions, feminist movement, and post quite a lot of, pictures and reports on, various trade union workers, labor movement. So it's quite interesting to look, and I'm quite in contact with them. There's a bit more political space, but this does not deny that you have repression, but a bit more compared to the rest of the region. The Gulf is a specific situation, as most of you know, most probably. For the vast majority of them, the workers are actually coming from sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, and they live like modern slavery. One of the key forms of capital accumulation for the Gulf is obviously energy resources, but the ultra exploitation of the workers. And actually, the whole modern slavery kind kafala system is inherited from a political decision made in the 80s, where most of the workers from the 50s, I would say, to the beginning of the 80s, were workers from the region, Syrian, Lebanese, Palestinian, Egyptian, etc. But there were two problems with them. It was easier for them to make connections with the local working class, speak the same language, and brought very often, kind of more radical ideologies, socialism, pan-Arabism, communism, and you had a couple of strikes in the 50s, 60s, quite important, 70s, and by the 70s, 80s, they started increasingly demanding rights. They want to live there with rights, etc. So there was a change. And actually, when you had, I think it was in the 80, 70% of the foreign workers were Arab, beginning of the 2000s, it was 20%. Obviously, there's major differences between the countries. And one of the reasons why Saudi Arabia, would say, had not advanced as fast as the UAE or other Gulf regime regarding the normalization with Israel is that they have an indigenous population of 60%. UAE is 10%. Qatar is less than 5%. So they don't have to deal, if you want, with a big local pressure. And this has consequences we have to take into consideration. But one of the few countries that had, quite important trade unions active and playing a role was, for example, Bahrain. The Bahraini trade union in 2011 was quite important. And on the day of the general strike, this is when you had the foreign intervention of Saudi Arabia with other Gulf regime to crush the uprising. After the Bahraini regime did a new trade union linked to the state. So this is a bit about the Gulf. Kuwait, you have some also interesting political history as well. But also this division. And one of the key actually challenge is to, and not only, but you have a bit, not similar, but same questions in Lebanon, but more and more the issue of putting forward connections between, indigenous population and foreign workers. As trade, more connections need to be done. But according to the country, sometimes they will never meet. If you look like, a UAE citizen, even though he works more, or he has a company, or he works in a public, in the public sector with very high, salaries, very good conditions. This is also partially possible because of the exploitation of the other workers, and that they have specific benefits. So it's also this kind of difficulties have to be taken into consideration, I think. And when it comes to the Levant, the Bilad al-Sham, Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, and if I include Iraq, we're currently living a deep economic crisis in all these countries, talking about, over 60, 70% of poverty, suffered wars. In Iraq, you have the power of the militias that also, dominate some trade unions. Syria trade unions are dominated by the same regime. Lebanon, most of the trade unions, there were attempts of independent trade unions. Now, most of them are connected to the sectarian neoliberal ruling class. So it's very difficult. And honestly, I say to a couple of friends, I'm sorry, but it's difficult times. It's difficult time to see a bit of optimism and this kind of wide-scale destruction. Wide-scale destruction, to give you the level of poverty in Syria is over 90%. Most of the people live with remittances sent from abroad. Actually, the level of, and this is one of the, if you cannot organize yourself, your only alternative becomes migration. The level of migration in Syria was as the highest in the past 15 years. So even highest at the, and not that the war is finished in Syria, but it's much less, much less, I would say, harsh in terms of war, but the economic situation is far worse. We reached a similar level than in 2013, 2014, when the war was at its top. So it's quite difficult, and we have a polarization, and I think I wrote recently an article around this regarding the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah, the head of the Hezbollah for 42 years. And the polarization of reaction on one side, sadness from its supporters, but also joy from some, for example, in Syria because of the destructive role of Hezbollah by helping us. For me, I was neither crying, neither celebrating, but it showed me, the weakness of an independent leftist bloc in the region, able to oppose Western imperialism, Israel, and on the side, authoritarian regimes. So yeah, I think, and this is why also the counter-revolutions have played a destructive role in the ability to self-organize. So obviously you have things happening. If you want to speak more specificities, like for example in Sweden, in a particular region of Syria, you do have demonstrations, but I mean it's still very much limited. You do have forms of organization for humanitarian assistance in Lebanon that has to be loaded as a particular, and with deep political tensions and sectarian tensions. But I mean it's difficult. Tunis, that was a bit better. You see there's authoritarian tendency in the past few years with Qais Said, the Tunisian president. So yeah, so this is a bit the situation, but I think there's a lot of obstacles, the deep economic crisis, the lack of a political alternative, the ability to self-organize, and for a lot of people, the alternative is basically migration. And this is how also we understand the destructive role of European Union. The European Union has more and more become, what we call Europe forteresse, like trying to build a very militarized kind of union that prevent any migration with, violence against migrants. Mediterranean Sea has become a Dead Sea, in many aspects, with thousands, tens of thousands of people dead. So no, there's a lot of obstacles, and I hope I had mentioned a couple of them, but just to give you, I'm sorry, a very negative picture, but this is unfortunately the reality. But maybe if I found more positive things, I will mention them, but it's quite difficult for the moment to be quite optimistic. For the second issue, well, it confirms what we were talking about, that Israel would not have been able to act the way it had without the total support of the US. The US has been key, and we have to condemn the hypocrisy, really, of this US government, about and the total complicity and partnership in the genocide. And I think also the way Netanyahu presented things, we came back to a vocabulary that reminds me of the 2000s with Bush, the new Middle East. He used this term, we're trying to create a new Middle East. That is what Bush was saying for the US occupation invasion of Iraq. And if he's able to do this, it's because he knows he has the total support of the US to do this. For example, US were saying we oppose, extension of the war in Lebanon. As soon as Hassan Nasrallah, Hezbollah Secretary General, was assassinated, Biden, said it was a great thing to do. As soon as Israel, Iran or Israel threatens to attack Iran, US is basically sending, anti-ballistic missile or the whole system you mentioned. So this is clear. It's clear that go forward, basically. Go forward, and we want to consolidate a region that not even a single, a small opposition will be accepted. And this is also a sign, I think, of weakness. Why do I say this? Because since the beginning of 2000, the defeat of US occupation in Iraq, the international financial crisis 2008, the revolutionary processes in the region, we have a relative weakening of US imperialism. And therefore, it has basically to base also its power, consolidation, its influence in the region through its gendarmes, through its key imperial assets, especially Israel, and to push forward the US normalization, Israeli normalization with Saudi Arabia to consolidate this influence. But in this relative weakening, it is saying clearly we will act violently against any political actor that even partially challenge or do not accept our total kind of political project. So there's also, I'm saying it's a sign of weakness, but in this weakness, it is much more violent because it wants to reconsolidate its influence. Because even though China is a great, economic, rival to US, it cannot compare militarily. US still has, I think, decades of advance on other superpowers in many aspects. So yeah, so just to say, I was confirming what was said, but it's important also to say this issue of the new Middle East, etc. Now, trade unions, the difficulty, the Democrats, without put, obviously, I think you have the same experience wherever you want to speak with the kind of the ruling strata among the trade unions of internationalist issues or democratic issues, it becomes difficult. It's outside of our scope very often. But I think it's again about showing the connections, showing the connections between the different political projects, neoliberalism, capitalism, how these basically are the same enemies, and that as workers we cannot accept, this basically, and how, yeah, the same that are basically, and obviously we have to be careful with this argument, but I think in the case of the US, it has, a weight with 18 billion being spent for a year on Israel genocide. This money could be spent, elsewhere. This is also an argument to be made to cut any kind of sales of weapons, that we don't want to participate in a genocide that has been actually acknowledged by the ICG, that you have international human rights organizations that are far cannot be characterized as radical leftists, has characterized Israel as an apartheid state, that there are laws that prevent any kind of collaboration with, a state committing crimes, or etc. So I think it's quite important to make the point, but again, I think it's winning the base and to put pressure again on the professional among the trade unionists, the permanents, etc., that have a key interest to just have the trade union live in this aspect, and again making the links between the various, like the dockers have been collaborating with each other. I think it's important if we can, like for example tonight, share our experiences. We have been, and also again to put the thing that, for example, especially as academics, maybe Bill can jump in also as others, but what we've seen that through the 7th of October and since a year, our engagement with Palestine have become more and more about also building new unions or new association among the university to defend our basic democratic rights, our basic ability to continue our academic work, because we're all facing pressure, myself in my university, increasing pressure, attacks from the politics to kick me out, basically, or to make me resign from my university. And the university administration has done nothing against the attack. On the opposite, they've been pressuring, stop organizing on campuses, don't help the student to organize. So we have to, and this is why I say that the Palestinian issue is not only about international solidarity, but it's about defending our democratic spaces. And I think this is something that we've seen the most in liberal democratic framework. With all the, be very careful with whether in the US or Western Europe, we have to be very careful in this, but there's a clear attack on democratic rights. And I think while I think as socialists, we did not have, for example, a lot of expectations of this kind of system, for a lot of people, it's completely new. I was talking with, someone that is working at university, just started a PhD, and she told me basically, she's originally from Tunisia. So I would never have believed that in Switzerland I would face so much pressure to organize, to be. I thought, we were living in a democracy, and and it was shocking for me. And I think this is where we, as radical leftists, has to say, we have a role to play, to organize, to structure, to say why we defend democratic rights. We don't have any expectation from this liberal democracy. And actually, we know that these ruling strata, as soon as they can, they will, forbid us of organizing. And this is another thing that very often they say, what, they will continue by doing this? Will they continue with helping for the genocide? We've seen so many proof of this genocide. Will they continue to prevent us from organizing? I say yes, they will if there's no resistance. And also this is something to make clear, that they will have no limits. And without a counter-opposition, counter-hegemonic project, we will be in danger in our societies. And this is where I think, as I concluded, I think we need to make the links. I hope I answered all the questions. Yeah, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to cover everything, but again, thank you very much for your kind words and the exchange. It's really useful also to me for me. So to go first regarding imperialism, I think when we say that there's a relative weakening of the of U.S. imperialism, it's not to deny that U.S. imperialism remains the most important and dangerous in the world, and that the EU, despite attempts sometimes to try to have a bit more autonomy, is very much still dependent on the US. And I think the Ukrainian issue demonstrates this, actually, and that the US have been using Ukraine while we defend completely the self-determination of the Ukrainian population against an imperialist invasion. But you can see that the US would be happy with a deal with Russian imperialism on this, because the key target for the US is not Russia, it's China. We have to be clear that the key issue is about China. And this is why I was saying this relative weakening of the US also creates a situation where obviously the world is even more dangerous in many aspects, with this inter-imperialist rivalries. We can see this in China. US has been multiplying, kind of deals with various, countries, states in Southeast Asia to challenge basically China to expand its own influence. At the same time, China is also acting in a way, much more imperial. But again, as I was saying before, China has definitely expanded its international influence, but remain in terms of militarily very far behind US, and even I would say, military speaking, Russia still remain, a key military power. And actually, just as Israel has been doing with the Palestinian, Russia, when they intervened in Syria, the year after, they also put forward the fact that they used their weapons in various ways, and how successful the Russian intervention was in Syria to increase the sale of its weapons, arm equipment abroad. And it's true that when you look at the Middle East, that you have more autonomy of certain regimes, especially Turkey, Saudi Arabia, that cannot be only considered as simple client. They have their own autonomy. We can see this Turkey regarding NATO. And Saudi Arabia basically, when Biden called Mohammed bin Salman, the ruling man in Saudi Arabia, saying, we need oil a bit less expensive, he said, no, we have our own, political economy, orientation and ambition regarding Saudi Arabia 2030. So there's formal autonomy that we cannot deny. Does that mean that their links with the US is not as important as before? No, it is. Saudi Arabia depends militarily on US. Financially, it's completely connected to the US, but it is playing a bit more and basically saying, we will not be, just implementing your orders. We will make you pay more. And this is also what Saudi Arabia is saying to Israel. It knows that it cannot sell a peace without something to be given, because they were ready to do the normalization with Israel. But according to their own population now, if they don't have something to sell to the Saudi population, it will be very difficult to go forward. But Saudi Arabia, you know what I'm saying? What we're witnessing today is a temporary pause in the normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel. For Saudi Arabia, it's a strategic decision, the normalization with Israel, and also in the perspective of consolidating US influence. But if you look China in the region, most important for China is to expand its economic influence, but politically it's still, even though it did play a role to some extent between Saudi Arabia and Iran normalization, it was rather Saudi Arabia failure of foreign policies, whether in Yemen or against other, against Iran, that pushed Saudi Arabia to seek this normalization. So China still has limited influence, I would say, in the region of the Middle East. So what I can say is that Greater Israel, what is sure is that the US is, if it has the ability to liquidate completely the Palestinian issue, it will do it. And Israel has a key interest as a settler colonial state. The problem for the US is to deal with regional regimes that are pro-US, because it creates instability. Jordan, especially, Egypt to a certain extent, Gulf a bit less, I would say, but still, this will create tensions. But here, what is being done, I think, is to really, and again, when I say changing the face of the Middle East, it means, Hezbollah is basically the crown jewel of Iranian influence in the Middle East. If it crushes it, it means it weakens massively Iranian influence, and therefore the role that Iran can play in the region. And also regarding Palestine, or etc. And when I say this, I will need to be clear, maybe it's also connected to the comment on Sinwar. Any kind of criminalization of resistance should be opposed by us. The right of resistance is a right, regardless of the political actor leading it. Just as I very often give this comparison, I would support the right of the Ukrainians to defend themselves, but I don't support Zelensky. We don't have the same political orientation. Similarly, Hamas and Hezbollah are the main actors leading the resistance. We might not like it. I'm not a very particular fan, as you know, neither of Hezbollah nor Hamas, but I support the right of that resistance. Just as in Switzerland, we had this debate among leftists, but we opposed, our party, the criminalization of Hamas, just as opposed the criminalization of Univision. This said, I think we also must be clear that neither Hamas or Hezbollah have the keys of the political strategy to liberate Palestine. And actually, the fact that Hezbollah is so much more isolated than in 2006 in the national political scene, but also in the regional political scene, is because of its political orientation, as becoming the main defender of the Lebanese sectarian and illiberal political system, to have played a destructive role in Syria, but in other countries, to crush an uprising. And in the 2019 uprising, it opposed the protesters and even sent their members to crush it. So just to say this, to be clear, and it comes to the second question. First, to clarity, Samidoun in Lebanon is different from Samidoun that was speaking on the international political scene regarding Palestine solidarity. Samidoun was a leftist kind of gathering And afterwards, I was part actually of most of the members that participated in Samidoun when I was living in Lebanon in 2010, 2012. Notably, a key friend of mine, Allah yarhamu, God has his. He passed away. Bassem Shit was a socialist, very important. He played a key role in Samidoun. So it was to help for the organization of basically Lebanese population displaced, etc. It's a very important. They brought stuff from Syria at the time, the products. It was a very good, and it was a particular moment. But the difference now, obviously, I agree with Marni saying that assistance to displaced refugees is political work. But the situation is much more different. You had the repression of the 2019 popular uprising. You have a deep economic crisis in Lebanon. Huh? Just to give you an example, is $1 was 1,500 Lebanese pound prior to the crisis. Today, 90,000 Lebanese pound is $1. Just to give you the impression, level of poverty has grown from 25 to 30 to 60 to 70. Most of the people live on remittances as well. You have multiple war, you have the explosion of the port. So the ability to oppose is very complicated. Also, you have a lot of kind of NGOs, but not like popular association from below movement organizing the fund. We all often, sometimes there's this talk about Lebanon being the republics of NGOs. So it's very complicated. It's very complicated. And unfortunately from the uprising, while it was repressed massively, the only people that could a bit play the role in it were mostly, I would say, right-wing liberals. The left was very divided, was not able to structure themselves. There's different attempts to independent trade unions were blocked or repressed. So it's kind of difficult. Yes, there is a radicalization. We cannot deny we have a political opportunity. But what I was saying then, and I think it's an opportunity, but a challenge. The spontaneity is obviously very important. But on the long term, if we don't organize, structure ourselves, we will be crushed. Yes, there's isolation of Israel, but well, this maybe I should have said before. I'm not sure I agree with Eliane Papé article, there's a crisis of Zionism. Actually, if Zionism is able to go on after a year of genocide, expanding the war, for me, it's not a crisis, on the opposite. If you want to say there's a crisis of, as we were talking before, a Zionism as a dominant political ideology among the Jewish population, especially the youth in the US, yes, clearly. And this is a sign of hope. This is clearly a sign of hope that we have to look to. But I'm not seeing right now, and because of the political domination, neoliberal authoritarian project, and fascistic, a crisis of Zionism. On the opposite, Zionism is actually a model for them to follow. And this is why I'm saying Gaza is a reflection of the deep political crisis we're living in, internationally speaking. So yes, there's radicalization, etc. But I mean, for me, it's maybe I'm a bit too pessimistic, but it's not enough, this frustration. And we all have our political experiences, but for me, my fear is to have, it's obviously not the same political situation, but when we look at the beginning of the revolution processes in 2011, 2012, there was high hope, but the repression was terrible, the counter-revolution was terrible. It's also about, and we were facing local regimes, Islamic fundamentalists, imperialist, regional regime, and I think it should be very different when it comes to the Palestinian issue. Again, they help each other, ruling classes learn from each other, and the reaction is very clear since a few months. After the demonstrations, occupation, you can see everywhere there's increase in repression. So I think we need to be careful. I'm a bit long, sorry, but for this, maybe for Mani, I invite you to read the Palestinian author Emil Habib, who wrote Mutasha'im, what means peace optimist. It's a mix between pessimism and optimism. it's a tale of a Palestinian, despite the worsening situation. Well, in this worsening situation, there was a rise a bit of resistance. So hopefully we can have this, but it's a writer that was Palestinian 48 that did his classes, basically political classes with the Communist Party, Palestinian Communist Party. But c'est quite well known. I think it's present in English. Just on the issue how to re-energize for Ashley, this is the key question. I'm always, and I think this is the question all socialists have: how to re-energize, how to organize, how to reach to people, different, even I'm feeling now with the beginning of the 20s, most people are telling me to put myself on TikTok, just IT things or social medias. It changes so fast. Just the way you use social media. Facebook is basically end of 30s, 40s, but you see a lot 20s, 30s, they don't use Facebook. Transmission. It's stupid what I'm saying, but it's just a reflection how things are changing fast, how the tools to organize. Yes, sometimes trade unions have their limitations, reaching to, for example, workers that are, don't have papers. It's a key difficulty wherever we are until today. How do we reach to organize workers that are not officially, with papers, etc.? It's a key difficulty. How do we organize a new kind of economic sector that have, increased, that we don't see the working class only through industrial manufacturing sites, that we don't see only through white men. These are all questions that are brought forward that we need question to think collectively. So I don't have key answers, but for me, for the moment, what is truly important is for me the policy of United Front and opposing forms of sectarianism, because I think this is a deadly threat for the left, to basically be only commentators of politics. And I see this, it's very easy to be right among 5 people, to have the most radical thing on your own side, but it's for me the most dangerous thing. And I'm seeing it. It is also a result of defeats. It's a result of defeat to try to mix, I don't want to say with the normal people, but with the larger population. So just as the issue of trade unions, creating new ones or being able to act, and establish one, depends on the political situation, what is being able to do. I wouldn't give any kind of definite answer. In university, I'm into the kind of traditional one, because I believe we can build a larger base, etc. There's a small trade union, there are 2, but they're the most radical. They're happy like this. It's like they want, But I think it depends on the political situation. Finally, I think BDS is key in this because for two main reasons. It's an excellent tool for political education around Palestine. Why? The 3 main demands tells you the history of Palestine and the Palestinians. Basically, the end of occupation, equal rights for Palestinians for 48. It tells you about, basically the apartheid state, and the right of return. The right of return because a large chunk of Palestinians, half of them, are outside. So it tells you the political history of the Palestinians. So first of all, and after, it's a tool of action to organize against your own ruling class, to pressure them, etc. So those, I think, and it comes, it's the thing that has gathered a large section of the Palestinians, trade unions, political parties. And if we're able to organize on this, I think it's really important. So BDS for me, yes, is a clear main word. And also it helps us gain, people on, I was saying, political history of Palestine against our own ruling class, but they have a kind of orientation, how to work, banning any kind of military relationship, academia, showing how Israeli universities are playing a key role to render the occupation more efficient, or how racism is rooted, how political armed strategy are fought in universities, like Dahi doctrine and others, how they participate in the IT. For example, the university close to mine, it's called EPFL, École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne, have multiple, because they're fond of startup, So IT collaboration, private agreements, PPPs with Israeli IT Elbit system. So this is also a way to, to fight against privatization, etc., to make the link. So yeah, and this is a bit in my perspective of United Front, BDS, able to radicalize people on a large scale and not being isolated. Yeah, I think I exceeded my time. Maybe one last thing on to give you an example for Tom. Similar in our university, there were accusations of anti-Semitism for some slogans. So there was a report, nothing. What did the administration consider as anti-Semitic? Palestine will be free from the river to the sea. So we said this is not, on the opposite. And in the book, I wrote a thing in a Palestine Marxism explaining on the opposite, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, is a democratic, inclusive slogan against a racist and inclusivist project, actually. So we have kind of similar and hardcore attacks regarding, continuous anti-Semitism. But again, sorry, I've been a bit long. Thank you very much for inviting me. I hope it was useful.